one of the questions that was asked this morning was, I'm going to paraphrase it, but what do you really get jazzed about with your work? I've got 3 examples to share with you today. And a fourth that you just heard from, Pamela McAfee, was a student of mine at one point. Yeah. And we're waiting for a picture and a Zoom to see if our 3rd team member, but I'll introduce first, immediately to my left, is Jill Harmon. Jill is a doctoral student who's getting close to getting started in her research. And by day, she is a clergy person in the state of Nebraska, among other things. And Holly Espinover is also a doctoral student in interdisciplinary studies. And her day job, which you would think is maybe 2 day jobs, is she is HR for 2 hospitals, 2 different hospitals in a larger system. They're busy ladies. And our 3rd panelist member, go ahead. Okay, Kirti's with us. We're trying to connect our 3rd team member in because she had things that kept her at home in the US. And she is a graduate of the program that I teach in. And Dr. Evita Salas is a commander in the United States Navy. And she was a classmate of Pam McAfee's. So we're waiting to see. 2 people entered the waiting room. They have not been let in, and I am one of them. Don't we love technology? All right, Evita, are you there? I see your picture. Hello, Evita. There she is. Wow. I'm not sure what you can see, Evita, but there's a crowd here of about 700 or 800 people. Amazing people. And then sitting on the stage here with me are Jill and Holly, who you know. And in the back of the room is one of your classmates, Dr. Pam McAfee. Now, can we hear you? We need to do a volume check. They're making an adjustment. Hang tight. Okay, I'm assuming, Evita, you turned mute off. That's one problem I always have. I sometimes forget to unmute myself, which people are sometimes grateful for.
Oh, I can see.
I hear you. Talk some more.
Okay.
Hey.
Can you hear me loud and clear?
Loud and clear. You are coming in brilliantly. It's like you're next door.
All right. Fantastic.
Okay, so now what we need to do is get the PowerPoint up, and we will be rocking and rolling here with the 3 amigos and this guy. All right, we're waiting for the PowerPoint. Can I what? Yes, we can, but you don't get to see the beautiful cover slide. So give me just a second and I'll pull up the prompts here. All right, so the presentations we've heard this morning really, I think, cue us up quite nicely, because our focus here is around a concept called servant leadership, which may be a term some of you have some familiarity with, and others this may be the first time you're hearing it. But it's a concept I'm sure you all know. It's just not by that name, and there we are. Just a quick little framing that I'm going to do before I turn it over to the group. Thank you very much. And I will try to press gently instead of multiple slides at once. the term servant leadership is a phrase that was coined by a gentleman named Robert Greenleaf, sometime in the early 70s. And no need to go into the long history. We can do that later if anybody really wants to know that. But it presented a model and a way of thinking about leadership differently than I think we have in general as we've come through a couple hundred years of the Industrial Revolution and the post-World War II era. And it starts with this. He was really thinking about society as a whole. And what he was thinking of was, if we're going to really make this thing work socially, we've got to be able to provide opportunities for people to lift up others, to help serve them, and help create a greater, more caring and thoughtful society. It's a grand and noble idea, but we got to put some wheels under this car or it's not going to go anywhere. Whoops, I'm guilty now too. And as Greenleaf defined the servant leader, he described it as it's a person who by their natural heart and their natural inclination toward others wants to serve first. And then from that serving, leadership emerges, or you are called to leadership. And two really important points with how Greenleaf went on to write about this and define it. The choice to be a servant is one that each and every one of us can have. Nobody can ever take that away. We can serve from whatever position or title we have. That's an important concept. The second is leader is a position, is a title. It can be given and it can be taken away. But nobody can take away any person's desire to serve. And so that's an important distinction I think he made. And then one other thing about the term servant leader. Do you think it might create a little controversy or heartburn in some places? Oh yeah, I've seen it, I've been there. And there's two really important points I take away from his thinking and writing on this. Number one, as Greenleaf defines servant, it in no way means subservient. It is not less than. It is a grand and noble calling. And the second part of that is, and my brain just blinked, maybe it's that post-lunch slump, but that's an important piece. It in no way means subservient. That we view each other as peers, as colleagues, as equals in the world. We're all human. So to frame it a little bit, traditionally we've seen leadership, particularly post-World War II, emerge in a very linear fashion. A lot of command and control kinds of structures and varying ways that leaders think they have to be. But is that really what we need today? Especially when we're thinking about all the challenges and issues that have been touched on earlier today. And if we want our organizations to be optimal, might it be useful to try to help our people become more whole? So when we think about the human condition, mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual, medical science can address and help with three of these things. One, they cannot. My wife is a physician, and I don't think they have a spiritual pill or a spirit pill out there. So what does that mean? This becomes an important piece of a leader's role. How do I grow and nurture and cultivate spirit within an organization and the individuals who are part of that? So there are qualities and characteristics that we can associate with servant leadership. This is but one list. There are multiple ones out there. But you get the sense of it's part of the package that anyone who we would call a servant leader has. This comes out of the Jim Collins Good to Great research, which is now about 20 years old. Anybody in here familiar with that? Okay. They called it level 5 in that research, but in the eyes of those of us who were reading it, it was servant leadership. And you see, this is a little different. It's not the tough guy kind of leadership that is often associated in a lot of popular press and other things. So the way I would think about servant leadership is it's far more holistic in its approach. There is a fair degree of intuition that goes into this, which makes some of the MBA students I used to teach really nervous. It's very difficult to measure. And in comparison to the more traditional approach of what I would call clinical or technical, this is very much art. Leadership is an art, probably as much or more than it is any kind of a science. And what I like to do as a quasi-academic, I have feet in the real world and also in academia, is I like to find ways things complement and support each other. And what we're looking at here is it's not just about taking good care of people, or it's not just about managing things well. It's about both and. And that's the way I define servant leadership when you look at the leadership theory of transactional and transformational leadership. It's both of those. And the more we can overlap those circles, the better. So let's jump into some real world application here. And I'm going to turn this over to my dear colleague, Dr. Evita Salas.
Thank you so much, Dr. Miller. So I'm excited, everyone, to present to you. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, but I'm tremendously glad technology is cooperating for me to be here on screen with you. And so my section, I'm going to talk about servant leadership in the U.S. military. So as you know, my name is Evita Salas. I'm an active duty U.S. Navy commander and a servant leadership ambassador. And so my passion for servant leadership runs deep. And I continually strive to be a servant leader in all aspects of my life, including in my military service. So this section is based upon my experiences in the military, and my views are my own and do not represent the views of the U.S. Department of Defense. And as the title suggests, servant leadership is a philosophy for the greater good, and is based on the idea that leaders prioritize serving the greater good by serving their teams and organizations first. That does not mean discounting one's own personal objectives, but rather prioritizing the objectives of the team and organization first. So said another way, mission first, people always is one of the slogans we use in the military. And so by the end of my section, you will know how compatible servant leadership is with military service. Next slide. So servant leadership in the U.S. military. Military service is about service to something bigger than yourself. I believe it is a calling. As of August of 2023, the U.S. military population is just over 2 million. And so you put that in perspective with the U.S. population being just over 335 million. So that means that less than 1% of the U.S. population currently serves in the U.S. military. So it's a small group in the grand scheme of things. The military is rooted in tradition since its founding in 1775, and thus very policy and doctrine driven. But what is doctrine? Doctrine consists of fundamental principles by which military forces guide their actions in support of national objectives. So doctrine establishes a common frame of reference, including intellectual tools that commanders use to solve military problems. It is what we believe to be true about the best way to do things based on the evidence to date. Now, it's important to note that military leadership doctrine does not tell service members how they should lead, but rather gives service members a framework to apply in the various situations they will face. So military leadership doctrine is about duty, service, and self-sacrifice, and prioritizing the good of those under their charge. Not all military leaders are authoritarian in their leadership style. That's the typical archetype that many think of when thinking about military leaders. And movies, no doubt, propel this view. An authoritarian style leadership exists in almost any occupation, as does servant leadership. But in a few slides, I will talk about some military leaders who exemplified servant leadership in action. All right, next slide. So servant leadership in action within the US military. Blanchard and Broadwell, in their book, Servant Leadership in Action, How You Can Achieve Great Relationships and Results, state that servant leaders embody the following qualities. And you heard Dr. Miller talk about it. That is, again, to rehash, listening, empathy, healing, awareness, persuasion, conceptualization, foresight, stewardship, commitment to the growth of people, and building community. So if you parlay these to the military, you'll yield the following. Personal and professional development of others, and that includes subordinates, peers, and those senior. To say it another way, that's leading and mentoring up, down, and across. Mental agility and awareness is especially important for a military member, as well as boosting morale and team performance by building trust and unity, and fostering a connected environment by positively impacting the culture and climate of an organization. And lastly, building resilience. This is like all the rage now, but this is very important for a military service member to be resilient. Next slide. So, servant leaders in each military branch. I've identified the main ones here. We have Space Force, but they're so new that we don't have a track record yet of that history, but we do for the other ones. So I'll start with the Army. It's our oldest branch. General Colin Powell, maybe you've heard of him, was a former four-star Army general who served as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was also National Security Advisor and the United States Secretary of State. He was well known for his listening skills. He intentionally took time to listen to his team members, and this leadership style led to successful mission accomplishment and his subordinates' personal improvement. And as you heard, listening is a very important quality of the servant leader. For the Marine Corps, General James Mattis was also a former four-star general and former U.S. Secretary of Defense, also known as the Warrior Monk. His behavior supports his philosophy of servant leadership. He fully embraced this, and he prioritized the needs of his team members and put them first, while everything else came secondary to their needs. Admiral William McRaven was a former four-star Navy admiral and a Navy SEAL who led with integrity and earned the trust of his team. He applauds the importance of teamwork, noting that no one paddles the boat by themselves. And then General David Goldfein was a four-star Air Force general who last served as the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. In his first letter to U.S. Air Force personnel, he emphasized the importance of servant leadership, specifically, and how airmen of all types should be committed to servant leadership. He also urged cadets to be humble servant leaders. And just to point out, the Air Force's core values are integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. Next slide.
While I'm doing that, Evita, I might add, she obviously is giving examples of people who have achieved very high rank, but the ethic that she has described runs through the ranks, and probably the best examples you would find of servant leadership in the military is in what they call non-commissioned officers, and that's the sergeants who really carry that culture very strongly. Agree?
I absolutely agree with that.
And I'm not sure, what is the rank in the Navy? They're not sergeants. Is that your ensigns and your lieutenants and commanders?
There's an echo. Didn't hear exactly what you asked.
Yeah, what are the ranks in the Navy that fit with the sergeant examples in the Army, Marines, and Air Force?
Oh yeah, so your NCOs would be your middle enlisted rank. So you have like your E5, E6, E7. So that would be for us a petty officer second class, petty officer first class, and then you go into the chief petty officer, which is the chief's mess for Navy. So I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with Navy culture. That's the pivotal step forward in the chief's mess. When you get to those ranks, you're the key linchpin You're essentially the anchor. They call them the anchors because they are the anchors of the Navy, and they interface directly between the junior enlisted and the officers who run the Navy.
Did you all get all those acronyms? We'll do closed captioning later for those of you who want to know what those different acronyms were. Okay, Evita, we are on the Creed #1 slide.
Okay, so the ingredients of success in military teams. So we're on that one, yep. So all military members swear an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. But it doesn't stop there. So military members also live by a creed, and each military branch has one that emphasizes service in some way. And a creed sets the tone of service in each military branch and provides a value structure by which to work and live. The military is a hierarchical organization, which means that each military member is led by someone senior to them. So in other words, there's always someone you must answer to. The commander of a unit is the boss and sets the vision for a desired end state, goal, or aim for the unit's mission. And this is called commander's intent. So commander's intent helps communicate the vision clearly. It describes what success looks like to all members. So with an oath, a creed, and a commander's intent to guide a team, this will help ensure the team cohesively accomplishes its mission. However, it won't be possible unless there is trust, a culture of inclusivity and belonging, and a positive command climate where morale is up and the team is productive. Next slide. So, what constitutes a servant leader? How do we know if we are a servant leader or if we work for one? Well, it's very simple. The philosophy of servant leadership is ancient, but Robert K. Greenleaf is credited with bringing servant leadership philosophy to the forefront of modern discourse. And he produced the best test of the servant leader. So as you can see on the slide, it says, do those served grow as persons? Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become servants? And what is the effect on the least privileged in society? Will they benefit or at least not be further deprived? So if you apply this to the military leaders, military as an institution, we can conclude that the U.S. military does offer opportunities for growth throughout a service member's career. Leaders are committed to service members' physical, emotional, and mental well-being. And leaders promote a culture of inclusivity and belonging. Commanders go through rigorous screening to have the privilege to lead others, and one cannot lead without meeting these criteria. But what's notable about Greenleaf's best test is that it's not about organizational charts or reporting relationships or the hierarchy, right? Anyone who meets the best test is a servant leader, and that's wonderful. Next slide. So, in this last slide, Kenneth Blanchard, as I mentioned before, he's an American author and business consultant and motivational speaker who's written over 60 books. And he's widely known for his work on servant leadership. He asks, why are you leading? Is it to serve or be served? Answering this question in a truthful way is important because you can't fake being a servant leader. It's a question of the heart. And the heart part is the crucial part to being a servant leader. In the military, servant leaders swear an oath, follow a creed, and adhere to and create a clear commander's intent. They are tested by Greenleaf's best test and embody Blanchard's qualities, as we mentioned, listening, empathy, healing, awareness, persuasion, conceptualization, foresight, stewardship, commitment to the growth of people, and building community, all while building trust among teams, promoting inclusivity and belonging, and fostering a positive command climate, and maintaining the mission first, people always, in support of service, and answering a call greater than themselves. So it's befitting that we close this section with Blanchard's quote that you see on the screen. Servant leadership is all about making the goals clear, then rolling up your sleeves. Doing whatever it takes to help people win. In that situation, they don't work for you, but you work for them. And so that concludes my portion, and I look forward to your questions during Q&A. That's what we set, and then next, I am happy to turn the mic over to my esteemed colleague, Pastor Jill Harmon.
Thanks, Evita. You all now know everything you ever wanted to know about military life and servant leadership.
Wonderful. Can you hear me now? Thank you very much for having us today. We're so glad. As I said, my name is Jill Harmon, and I have a few different hats that I wear. I'm an adjunct professor at Creighton University as well as a pastor, as you've heard. But Jessica, I don't want you to worry. I'm a cool pastor, so I drink margaritas and I have ripped jeans. So we're going to be fine. You know it. Hallelujah. So I think there is space for both, and that is such an important aspect of what we're talking about today, holding space for diverse things, right? I'm a person of faith, as I've mentioned, but I'm also a person who believes in science. And so perhaps it's a little fitting today that I want to talk to you about the science of hope and servant leadership. And so my first slide right here, I want to talk a little bit about what you see up on the screen, which is the FELF, or the fractional amplitude of low frequency fluctuations as compared to the medial orbital frontal cortex, or the MOFC. This is a lot of jargon this morning to say that this is the part of our brain that makes decisions, that holds space for emotion. And so a lot of times when things are going wrong, if we're struggling through anxiety or depression or major low points in our life, right, this oftentimes will be triggered in this part of our brain. But this is also the part of our brain that we can detect hope. And so here it is that we talk about something called agency thinking, and pathway thinking. So imagine that you come to visit me in Nebraska in the USA. Please don't do that. But if you'd like to, I'd love to host you. It's much more beautiful here. But let's imagine that you do, and that you get out your phone map, right, and that you're driving down the streets in Nebraska, which is always under construction, is it not, Carrie? And so when you run into construction, you can no longer go down that path. And so if you'd stop right there and think that I can't go, and then you just get back on the plane and leave, which I wouldn't blame you, but once again, don't, right? That's because we run into roadblocks and we think there's no other way. And sometimes life gets so overwhelming, right? We think there's nothing else that we can do. And so it's in these moments that hope is so important, because what it does is it instills pathway thinking. And pathway thinking is then in your map that shows you that there's another way to go. There's another path to take. And that we don't have to be overwhelmed and quit in those moments, right? And agency thinking, that's the gas in the car that gets us there, right? We need those two things to happen. And so as human beings, we love to protect our resources. This is something that's deeply personal to us. So when bad things happen, because things go sour, am I right? They're gonna go sour. That's how life works. But we want to protect. We want to protect things like our reputation, or our social resources, or our emotional or psychological resources. My friends, we are living in a world that's in a mental health crisis, because we live in a world that is full of cancellation. If we make a mistake, then that's our prescribed narrative. There's no way that we could be two things. There's no way I could be a pastor and drink margaritas at one time, right? But we have to know that there's space for both. And so when we talk about hope, right, this is the moment that servant leaders are so essential, because we're going to look at a world and say that, okay, right, we have a world where we make mistakes, or that we have two different things that we're holding space for, right? And so as servant leaders, we teach people to accept the world as it is, right? To acknowledge pain when we need to acknowledge pain, because that's important, and we need to sit with that pain, right? But then we don't want to set up camp and live there. We're going to continue to move forward, and so we're going to integrate global perspectives, like coming to learn from so many incredible women and men here right in this space today. We're broadening our perspectives. We're learning about how we can see the world in a different color. And that's so essential and vital, and servant leaders can help teach people that. We also help people understand that they believe that they can cope. Because when you run up against the roadblock and you feel like there's no other path, right? That's when a servant leader says, yes, but there is. So let's find this together, right? Let's celebrate small wins, or provide consistent feedback, or promote a growth mindset. Right? These are all things that we can do as servant leaders, and as Jeff said, not subservient leaders. Because, my friends, people matter. Right? We're looking at a world that doesn't know that they do. And when we see another human being, we don't know their journey, do we? Just like they don't know ours, but that's why we need to share our stories. That's why it's so essential to lead with compassion, to serve, right? That's the beauty in servant leadership. Because then we do something really beautiful. We create benevolence, right? We engage people in community service. We discuss the importance of kindness, because this also happens, did you know, to our brains, that when we do something for others, this triggers in our mind this dopamine, right, that makes us feel really good. One of my favorite shows back in the 90s, 2000s was a show called Friends, and there's a character on there named Phoebe. Any Friends fans out there? Phoebe was trying to do, thank you, a selfless good deed, and she couldn't find it because she always made her feel good, right? Because we have that dopamine that comes up into our brain that makes us feel good. Because that is important, because then we want to do another thing and another thing and another thing to continue to engage the world, to serve the world, to instill hope. My friends, again, if you don't remember one thing that I've said today, people matter. Our stories matter, and we have the power to instill hope. And we have the science right here. Now, it's my honor to hand over to my esteemed colleague as well, Holly, and she's going to talk a little bit more about how this looks.
Does anybody else want to go to Jill's next service? Anybody? I know, hallelujah, right? It's amazing. What a gift. What a gift you have, Jill. Thank you for sharing that. So my topic is absolutely along the same lines, and I think what you guys are going to see throughout this is this thread of connection that comes through every single piece of what we've talked about today when it comes to servant leadership. So I'm actually going to pause and ask you a question first. Better? Is that better? Okay, thank you. Let me ask you a question. Who has had a really bad leader? Oh, good. I mean, not good, but what made him a bad leader? Micromanagement? Didn't understand the team, the values. Lack of compassion. Disconnected from themselves. Interesting. Incompetence. Yeah. Lack of recognition. Yeah. They're just managers. They're not leading. Is that what you're? Yes. Yeah. So when we talk about servant leadership, what I'm going to hit on is very particular actions that I think every single one of us can take as it applies to how can we serve the people around us. Each and every one of you in this room is a woman in a leadership position, whether it's a formal position or whether it's an informal position. We heard all the way this morning about the position in the home to a position from a commander, right? We have all sorts of positions within this room. So what does it look like to be a servant leadership, no matter what role we have in this world? I'm going to go through and make sure I've got this. Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to actually start off with a little bit of research that Gallup has just done with the most recent global engagement report. Is anybody familiar with Gallup and some of the work that they do? So this slide that I'm going to hit on is what we have seen globally is actually an increase in the amount of daily stress in people's lives. So what we're seeing in the day-to-day work life, so we're seeing that increase. So how do we combat that? How do we change that? How do we bend that curve differently so it goes down? So the work that we do matters. So the work that we engage with, the people that we connect with, to make it matter. So Jeff, I'm going to actually have you go 2 forward, because I know I'm... Perfect. So I'm going to hit on these. I'm going to hit on these 5 particular behaviors and philosophies of servant leadership that each of us can take with us. So we're going to talk about altruistic calling. We're going to talk about emotional healing, wisdom, pervasive mapping, and organizational stewardship. So Jeff, I'm going to have you go to the next one. Oh, sure. So an altruistic calling. When we think about, and I'm going to connect directly back to what Avita said, is in one of the quotes that she highlighted was, they don't work for us, we work for them. What are we doing to serve the environment that we're in? As we lead, what are we serving? Who are we serving and why? It's a selflessness. It's showing up in that space and knowing that this is not about us, it is about them. It's a deep, deep amount of self-awareness. I'm going to pause and ask, we talked about mindfulness today in several different aspects of different areas of work. How much time do you spend in self-awareness? Ooh, not enough? 1 hour. A day? A week? A day. That is impressive. That's impressive.
The other aspect to that is mindfulness. How many of us have days where our mind is just full?
Full.
So we need to make that distinction too.
Absolutely.
How do we empty all the crap out that we take in on a daily basis?
So being able to spend time in that space where we are very connected to the work that we're doing also helps connect our people. All right, I'll keep moving. Our people to the purpose of what we're doing. Next. Emotional healing. So when we talk about servant leadership and healing, there is a direct connection when we give space for people to feel the emotions that they feel and show up in this space. Slow down. We make time for our people to connect. We make time for them to speak their truth to us as well. It creates an emotional space of healing when you can create the connection that allows them to be their true selves. I'll keep moving. Wisdom. So wisdom is not necessarily just about this older person who has had all of this experience. When we think about wisdom, it's not just intelligence, it's not just education. It is about having the high level of self-awareness to pause, understand the environment that we're in, have context to it, and then be able to relate that directly to your team members. When we serve from a place of wisdom, it's not knowing it all. It's stepping back and understanding the context of the situation that we're in and being able to have discussions around that create wisdom in the situation that we're in. Organization. Yeah, persuasive mapping. That one is actually my last one. Persuasive mapping. Okay, persuasive mapping. So persuasive mapping is the space where we sit with our team members and we allow them to speak about how they've come to the process of decision making. So really thinking through, how did I make the decision, or how do I want to make the decision that I'm about to make? So there's 4 different relational pieces to that. Attuning, so staying very connected to what they're saying, wondering, being curious about what they're saying, where that's coming from, asking questions, following what they're saying, and then holding space for them to speak, for them to be able to make that thought come to fruition. Practice connecting with curiosity. I want to know more. I am curious about what you have to say. Listen with your presence and guide followers forward with those practices.
Part of what Holly's talking about here is a relook at Maslow's hierarchy. If you look at what Maslow came up with, he talked about safety. And, I wasn't in the room with him, but my guess is psychological safety was probably the last thing they thought about, and that's become so important here. And what Holly is really addressing here is how do we create a space that's safe for folks to really share and learn with and from each other?
Absolutely. It also builds trust in the environment, right? 2 minutes. Got it. I actually need to go to organizational stewardship. Okay. So organizational stewardship. So when we talk about serving, it is serving at a higher purpose. So organizational stewardship is about encouraging making an impact within your organization, within society. It is very much what has been spoken about in each of these spaces, where we serve for a higher purpose, and we connect to that. Collective healing can happen when those things are chosen. You critically self-reflect. You move beyond compromise, You address the differences. You don't ignore those differences. You're able to have and hold conversation around that and build understanding through action. And then the flourishing as humans and as women.
Sorry. Oh, move ahead.
Yep. One more.
Flourishing as technology.
So as we work to try to bend the curve of daily stress, to bend that curve of daily stress, to increase employee engagement, and to lead from a place of service, what we do is look to understand each other as full humans. We make personal connections. We develop those relationships that show you value and recognize other people's skills and talents, the value that they bring to the organization and the work that is happening, and then you take action to live out those 5 principles in meaningful ways.
So I get to wrap this all up, everything you wanted to know. First of all, I want to acknowledge these 3 amazing women that I've had the privilege to work with. I'm sorry? Okay, Evita, they tell me the Zoom's going to go bye-bye. And they're plotting.
Should I just log back in?
Are we going to log her back in or not? We're going to finish probably while that happens. So I'll get back to you in a few minutes. Okay, thank you. Each of these young women has been an absolute delight to work with as a professor who gets challenged by them constantly. I love it. And as you can see, 3 very competent professional women who are in very different career paths and have found a way to connect servant leadership with their work and their communities. So there's a lot of paradox associated with this. The 2 terms appear to be in conflict, but that's part of the deal here. It really is a timeless and universal principle. You find it in almost every major faith tradition, and you could go back from the teachings of Aristotle and others to find these ideas. It wasn't called servant leadership, but the practices were there. And again, many people do this already. It's more intuitive for many. This is a long-term approach. You don't just come in on Monday and say, okay, our organization's going to practice servant leadership. And then say, everybody be nice to each other. Doesn't quite work that way. We do lots of trainings and workshops, and it's a constant battle. I've been studying this stuff for over 20 years, and there are times when I still feel like a novice. It is not a recipe by any stretch. It's more of a philosophy and a container within which you hold your own personal leadership practices. So, as I said, it's not a quick fix. This is not a newfangled management technique that's going to wow the Harvard Business Review or any of those, although there have been some articles in it. And it's not the answers. That's the stuff we got to sit down and figure out together, because the problems we're dealing with can't be fixed by one person. Maybe. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Peter Senge and his work with the 5th discipline and learning organizations. I think this is a really powerful and profound quote of his that, this is a deeply, deeply personal experience when you do this, because the inner work is probably as much, if not more important than the outer work. Always have to include a quote from one of our really, I would call it wisdom and conscious leaders in the U.S. You only need to have a heart to serve. And since they weren't represented by anybody on this panel, I want to just make a case that these kind of leadership philosophy, or this kind of leadership philosophy, will work in manufacturing. It's very effective. And I got stories, so if any of you want to hear stories, I can tell them. And there's our contact info. Thank you all. I know we got rushed, but appreciate the patience.